Well, hello, my soul friends. It is Victoria with the Soul Nurture channel, and I'm so delighted that you stopped by. Always honored that you would take your time to pop in and hopefully receive something from this channel that nurtures your soul and supports you right where you are on your journey of unfolding. Today, I'm going to have another conversation with my astrology mentor, Stephanie Austin, who has agreed to join me once a month. It's such a gift. It's such a joy. And today she's going to be sharing, and I'll be asking questions, exploring Saturn moving into Pisces, and whatever arises from her presentation, I'll be asking questions. Hopefully I'll be asking the questions you're wondering about, but if you have a question when she's sharing, please do put it in the comment and we will make sure to get back to you on that. We'll respond maybe the next month. So get yourself a cup of tea or whatever your favorite beverage is, and take this time for you, for our soul nurturing conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Stephanie to join me for our soul conversation. And here we go. Hello, my friend.
My pleasure to be with you again.
Oh, I really, truly, I'm so grateful that you said yes. Because it's not only, you've been such a gift to me with your wisdom, and for me to be able to share you in a greater way with my viewers, and hopefully, to share your wisdom that is so needed for these times. So I'm honored that you're here. And a timely topic.
Very timely.
Because we've got two major shifts this year in 2023, Saturn moving into Pisces. And we just talked about before recording Pluto moving into Aquarius, which we'll probably talk about next time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to turn this over to you and share your beautiful presentation, and I'll chime in with any questions that come to mind. And would you like me to go back to speaker view or just stay in the double panel?
Let's do speaker view.
Sounds good. Okay. Yeah. And it's all yours. Thank you.
All right. So what we're doing in this time together is looking at the zodiac as an archetypal cycle of development. There are 12 stages, 12 signs, of course. And what we're going to focus on today is the 12th stage in an archetypal cycle of 12 periods. So Pisces is the last and final sign in the zodiac, symbolizing completion, going from Aries, which is the emergence out of the oneness, into individual expression, going through all the signs and their lessons and coming full circle back to the oneness. So it's a very profound stage, one that's difficult, and we'll get into that shortly as to why it's more challenging in these times and in the culture that we live. And we're talking about it particularly because Saturn, which spends about 2.5 to 3 years in each sign, is moving into Pisces in a few days, right? And Saturn, I think, is one of the more misunderstood archetypes in the zodiac. I know the old books would say, oh, restriction and, suffering and all kinds of dire words about Saturn. But I think of it as more about mastering limits, about learning about responsibility. What are we responsible for and what is not our job? So having healthy boundaries is part of Saturn. And very importantly, about becoming our own authority, right? Recognizing that ultimately the buck stops here, that we are responsible for our choices, and that empowers us in our lives rather than looking at giving our power away to others, letting someone else tell us what to do. As adults, ideally, we've had internalized our own sense of authority where we know what's right or wrong. We don't need someone to tell us not to kill someone or to steal or whatever. We just know that's not right. We wouldn't do that. So Saturn is about maturity, about coming into our personal power and using that power responsibly. So it's a very important and wonderful archetypal force, right? As it changes signs, it's like the backdrop changes. And so it's one sign goes more back in the background and the sign that Saturn's moving in comes more forward. So Pisces, right? Saturn moving into Pisces on the 7th, just in a few days here, or maybe you're watching this later. Saturn will be in Pisces until May 24th of 2025, right? And so where we are mastering limits and responsibility and becoming our own authority shifts to the 12th sign of the zodiac, right? And so putting those keywords together, think of it this way. It's where we're redefining our spirituality, because Saturn is also about, again, definition, boundaries, how we structure things, right? Looking at what is enlightenment for us. You know, and I know for me that definition has changed radically along the path for myself. I used to think about, you know, spirituality as being good, you know, doing, you know, being a good girl, a good student, a good wife, a good, you know, practitioner. And as I went through life, I learned that it's more about becoming whole. It's not just about being good, but learning to integrate the shadow and learning to live from the heart, which is Pisces' challenge. So Saturn in Pisces is also, I think, about letting go of victimhood. Again, reclaiming our power, knowing that we are sovereign spiritual beings that have the right to our choices, right? And as long as those choices don't harm anything else, that's okay, right? So again, using our power wisely. I think Saturn Pisces is also about recognizing where we are still motivated by guilt or shame. There's a lot of that in the Judeo-Christian mythos of the original, what you might call the original sin program, where we are born sinners. We don't probably believe that consciously anymore, but there's a deep imprint that occurs at birth. If we're born into a Western culture, we have that matrix downloaded automatically where we have this very deep unconscious belief that we're not okay, that we're not worthy, that we're somehow flawed, and we have to be really good to get back into God's graces, which sounds absurd when we put it like that. But I think in the US, in my experience and in my practice over the years doing, I don't know how many thousands of readings, self-worth is a huge issue for most Americans, I could say, and probably for other Western cultures as well. So Saturn in Pisces will help us help clarify and see where we're still hooked into that old paradigm of not being good enough, you know, wise enough, pretty enough, strong, whatever that super ego limitation is, right? I think also Saturn Pisces will be about dealing with our fear of surrender and understanding what that really is. That surrender is not resignation. It's not giving up. It's not giving our power away, certainly, but it's about surrendering to love, surrendering to our heart, surrendering to our intuition, to the guidance of our higher self, right? We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well, but that's another very, I think, misunderstood concept in spiritual circles and in the general public as well. What is real true surrender? It's a shift from being driven by our ego desires and dropping down into our heart, being motivated by what calls us to do something, right? I think Saturn Pisces will also be about dealing with our fear of dissolving our ego. And this goes back to the 12-stage cycle. If we haven't navigated the previous 12 stages pretty well, we will likely get in trouble in the 12th stage. If we haven't developed a strong sense of self, a sense of identity, we can't really dissolve it, right? We have to have identified or developed ourselves in certain ways to be able to have the level of consciousness that it takes to let it go. Otherwise, there's a lot of fear. And even with a good sense of development, there's still a lot of fear about, well, who am I without my identity? Who would I be without being an astrologer or a wife or a mother or an American or any other labels that we have? So letting go ultimately of all those labels and recognizing ourselves or shifting that identity to our core essence. Doesn't mean we don't have a sense of self, but the identity shifts from something externally defined to an internal knowing. That's another piece that I hope Saturn in Pisces will help strengthen in all of us. Along the way to that, we might go through what is often called the dark night of the soul. In many traditions, this is a period where a lot has fallen away and nothing new has come in yet. We're kind of in that in-between stage where, well, I'm no longer I'm no longer identified with this part of my life or no longer attached to these things. So what is there left, right? And so there's a stage in the path where we have to kind of sit in the dark and the unknowing until that shift occurs, kind of like the cocoon, like the caterpillar, dissolving into the green goo stage, and then developing the wings and becoming transformed in that way. So Pisces is that stage where we're challenged to dissolve all our attachments, all our identifications, again, to shift that from something external to something internal, which is eternal, as well as internal and infinite. And this can be a lot of disillusionment along the way. And I think Saturn in Pisces will also hopefully help us strengthen our connection with our intuition. right? Because that's very much a big part of Pisces task. To have healthy spiritual boundaries, to not give our power away, even to teachers, not to automatically, give our power away to anyone. Certainly, it's important to have guides and teachers and mentors. I'm not saying that's not a good thing, but again, it's a question of locus, that we are choosing to do that rather than saying, oh, you've got all the power, you've got all the knowledge, I don't know anything. That's the old dualistic paradigm. So Pisces is where we come into our spiritual knowing and power. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the slides. So Saturn, practicality, realistic steps, and Pisces, spirituality. So I love this phrase that Angie Arian, a wonderful teacher and shaman, said many years ago, to walk the spiritual path with practical feet.
Ah,
I think that's a good encapsulation of Saturn and Pisces.
Mhm.
Saturn is again about form, structure, definition, how we master things. If you think about it, we need limits and boundaries to develop. We need, if we want to become good at something, we have to put time in. That's another level of Saturn. We have to put effort in. And Saturn is very much about consequences. What you put in, you get back. What you reap, what you sow. So Saturn is that truth that we will develop if we do concentrate on things. So Saturn, think of Saturn as the principle of concentration and focus and maturity as a result of that. So it's a very profound archetype, and I like to frame it in that way because it's much more empowering than the old definitions of restriction, limitation, suffering, and so on. That's not what I think it's used for, or very useful at all.
And yet it can feel that way sometimes.
Yes. When we have a Saturn transit, especially if it's like say to our sun or moon, an important part of our chart, we can feel like we're being corralled or narrowed down. But that helps us to focus and see what needs to change. Yes. I think it's interesting that Edgar Cayce, the amazing psychic, defines Saturn as the planet of change. And when I first heard that, I thought, oh, no, Uranus is the planet of change. But then when Saturn transits focus us to the point where we need to see, is it working? And if things are still working, great, keep going and go to the next level. If things are not working, then we need to do something about it.
Yes, in that regard, it's our helper, wanting to prepare us, wanting us to be ready for the opportunities. And I don't know if you're going to touch on this with your other slides, but I also think of Pisces, Saturn in Pisces as a beautiful time for visioning, bringing Neptune energy to Saturnian, structure and greater possibility of making it real.
Absolutely. Yes. Saturn manifestation and Pisces vision, intuition, imagination. Absolutely. Yes. It can be a very creative time as well. And again, bringing it down to earth. Saturn is about very much the physical plane. So how can we bring that spirituality down to earth? How can we reconnect heaven and earth? They're not separate, but we've often think of them as different. So yeah, integrating matter and spirit. Beautiful. Yeah. So Saturn will be in Pisces, March 7th to May 24th of 2025. The last time, I think it's always helpful to think, when was the last time this happened? So we have some reference point. So if you're older than 30, you'll remember or have some reference points to this. So Saturn's last path through Pisces was May 20th to June 30th of 1993. And then it retrograded back into Aquarius for a few months. And then January 28th of 1994 until April 7th of 96. So a little dip in 93, and then all of 94, 95, and then in the very beginning of 96. So when you have time, think back in your life, what you were dealing with those years. In history, I think one of the best examples of Saturn and Pisces was what happened in South Africa. Nelson Mandela, who had been imprisoned for, I think, 28 years for a Saturn cycle, for trying to bring freedom and to end apartheid, the oppression of the Black people in South Africa. He was elected president during that period. And not only that, but he authorized something very profound, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a restorative justice commission, a body assembled after the end of apartheid. And it was chaired by Desmond Tutu. If you have never ever seen him speak or know of his writings, he's an extremely compassionate man and embodies Pisces energy in a very beautiful way, as does Nelson Mandela. And this commission invited the victims of gross injustices, of human rights violations, to give statements about their experiences, to share their wounding. And also the perpetrators of violence could also give their side of the story and request amnesty from prosecution. And it was, if you've ever watched any videos of that or read that, it's extremely powerful to have both sides be able to share, and then forgiveness can happen. So forgiveness is another piece of Pisces. It's not about forgetting or spiritual bypassing thing. Okay, I forgive you, but I'm still harboring resentments. But truly feeling all the feelings involved, the anger, the grief, the rage, the sorrow, whatever it is, and then recognizing our common humanity.
Wow. Stephanie, that is so powerful. If I may just interject, that is so powerful, thinking about the compassion, the practical compassion that this transit will offer us for such a time as this, because we have gone through some division and a lot of angst in our country and the world, even to come together. I can just imagine this coming together is what you just described, to share our perspectives and then meld in through compassion into a new unified perspective of how to move forward. So thank you for sharing that. I love the historic reference that we get to reference and say, well, how do we apply that during our time?
Yes, yes, and absolutely. The United States has a huge shadow, and for us to do that for what we have done to the Black population, the colonization of other countries, and so on, there's many that could be an extremely valuable process for this country and other countries as well. So we'll hold that as an intention for that to happen during this pass of Saturn and Pisces. Yeah. Okay, so let's go. If you can enable screen sharing for me. I
already did, but let's see.
Okay. So what we'll do now is, these are some slides. I did a 2-hour presentation on navigating Pisces Neptune transits last year for the Sacramento chapter of NCGR. And so these are just a few of the slides that I thought would be helpful for us to share today. So
while you're getting those slides, I'll just say that this presentation is available on Stephanie's website at ecopsychology.com. Not psychology, but it should be ecoastrology.com. And this 2-hour presentation, which she's just giving you just a little bit today, is available through her website. So I would encourage you to go there after you watch this video.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so what makes this energy so difficult for us? And a number of things. We don't often think about it, but we live in a very materialistic world, a very physically dominant world, right? And Pisces is the antithesis. That's about the spiritual, right? It's about that 5% that our scientific instrumentation cannot measure in the world. I think it's very helpful, and I found it very helpful to remember that 95% of our universe is inaccessible to our 5 senses. Right? We call it dark matter, dark energy, but we really don't know what that 95% is. Only 5% we can perceive with our eyes, our ears, and other senses. So that other 5% is our 6th sense, our intuition. So Neptune Pisces, whether it's a new moon in Pisces, the sun going through Pisces for a month every year, or Saturn going through Pisces for the next 2.5, 3 years, we're being called to reintegrate, to remember that the vast majority of our experience is metaphysical, is not accessible to our 5 senses. So remembering the spiritual, reconnecting, realigning with that. So going from predominantly focused on the physical to remembering the whole continuum of all the frequencies. We live in a very scientifically based culture, nothing wrong with that. But again, it's limited, right? What was true before may no longer be true now. It was not, maybe 500 years ago that everyone believed the earth was flat. Of course, we think that's ridiculous now, but 500 years ago, that was the norm. That was science that everyone, of course, knew. Otherwise, you'd fall off the planet, right? So there's many examples of that, even in medicine, bloodletting and all kinds of horrific things that we think of, that we would ever dream of doing now, were practices, not that long ago. So going from holding science or deifying science as the, last word on things, to mystical understanding. Mysticism is direct perception, knowing, again, from a heart-centered place, what is true. That doesn't mean we can't use science. Absolutely need that perspective. But again, there's much more than that. So including everything, or having access to much broader range of knowledge. Going from classical physics, Newtonian physics, which works really well in the everyday life, gravity and, the rate of something falling down and so on. There's certain laws that work. But for the last 100 years, we've had astounding discoveries in what's called the new physics or quantum mechanics, which on a subatomic level comes very close to mysticism. I can't really do it justice here, but if you want to read about it, there's lots of material, the chaos theory, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which essentially says that you cannot measure or determine where something is without affecting its location, right? It kind of proves that our observation, our attention fundamentally changes reality, right? You can't predict that light can be both a particle and a wave. It has a dual existence, right? Fractals, which are these wonderful patterns. I'm sure you have seen the Mandelbrot fractal patterns, beautiful. The repetition of a pattern, but a little change. So each time it's a little different. Like if you look at coastlines or certain plants, show the structure, spirals. So we see these patterns in the world, but they're constantly changing and evolving. String theory in physics postulates 11 dimensions at this point, right? We think of mostly in 3 dimensions, maybe time being the 4th dimension, maybe the astral being the 5th, maybe, we can have other words for that. But it's hard to think about 11 dimensions, right? What that would be. And one good reference point to that is to think of 2 dimensions, think of it like a piece of paper, a plane, 3 dimensions would be a sphere going through that plane. If you were living in 2 dimensions and saw a sphere, you would see first a dot and then a circle and then a little larger circle and then a smaller circle and then another dot. As it moves through, you go, what is happening, right? So when things happen that we can't explain, it may be because it's in a different dimension and our 5 senses are very limited in what they can perceive. So science, and especially quantum physics, really begins to substantiate this Piscean Neptunian reality, this metaphysical reality. So it gives us a lot of support for what we know on an intuitive level.
Yeah.
Right?
Can I just pause you for a second?
Sure.
For those who don't know the correlation between Neptune and Pisces.
Thank you. Yes. Every sign in the zodiac has a planet that corresponds very closely to it, and what's called its ruling planet. So Neptune is the more modern ruler of Pisces. We only discovered Neptune in 1846. Before that, Jupiter was the traditional ruler of Pisces and holds a lot of similarities. But Neptune is an even better, I think, representation of Pisces. Think of the mythology of Neptune. He's the ruler of the sea, right? And there's a wonderful metaphor of how each one of us is a drop in the ocean, but we're really not separate from that ocean. We may appear momentarily separate, but then we go back into the oneness. So that's a very good example of Piscean knowledge, that we're not really separate. We're all connected. We're all part of a larger whole, right? So we're both a particle and a wave in that sense, both a drop and a wave in the ocean of creation. Okay, so again, objectivity versus relativity, that goes back to that scientific paradigm. And then Neptune reminds us, and this would speak to those dimensions, that there's different qualities of time. We've all had experiences where we've been in the zone, you might call it, or if you're doing art or hypnosis or meditation or something that we really get totally immersed in. It can happen in any number of ways. We can be out in nature, we can be running, we can be, singing, anything that we kind of lose ourselves, but at the same time, we're connected with something else. So that you could call kairos. There's chronos, which is clock time, our everyday linear time. And kairos is a Greek word for sacred time, eternality, right? And other cultures have had words for this too, the Aboriginal dream time. We sometimes joke about it and call it island time when you're in more temperate climates. And so Pisces reminds us, and Neptune reminds us, there are many dimensions, again, many levels of reality. And parallel, what we might call parallel universes. There is substantiation from physics also that every choice we make creates another universe. If we choose this, and this parallel goes off and this parallel goes off. So there's this bifurcation, an infinite bifurcation of possibilities. Kind of really mind-blowing when you think about it. I believe it was Niels Bohr who said, if you read about the new physics and your mind is not boggled, you didn't understand it. You know, it's something, I'm paraphrasing poorly, but something to the effect of, if you're not so shocked by what the new physics has discovered, then you really didn't get it. It really blows us out of the old 3D paradigm. Okay, so some of the reasons why we struggle with this, because we're not trained. You know, we're not, unless we're happen to be immersed in a culture or have parents who are spiritually developed to, you know, live in this more Pisces Neptune world. You know, we don't get any training, and so when it happens, we kind of get lost, and we'll talk about that next. So I'm going to do the next slide here. So what this requires of us is making a number of shifts, and one of the most one of the core shifts is going from doing to being. You know, we think of the word human being, but often the first thing that we ask someone when we meet a new person is, "What do you do?" Right? We identify with you know, our profession, our country, or any number of things. But Pisces and Neptune remind us that our beingness is as important, if not more important, than our doingness. And that even when we're sitting still, and especially when we're sitting still in a very centered space, that level of consciousness is rippling out into the world, that we can be doing something by being still. Okay, and I know that's been a big lesson for me. I've got a lot of Virgo in my chart. I'm a good doer. You know, I want to be productive. And our culture, again, is very driven by external productivity. And we forget that our beingness is doing something. And yes. So the more centered we can be, the more heart-centered we can be, especially the more we can help stabilize the world, especially when it's going through, you know, this big transition right now. So from doing to being, very important piece of Pisces. Similarly, from action to receptivity, right? From switching to putting energy out to allowing ourselves to receive, whether that's, again, in meditation, in nature, any kind of art or activity. But again, knowing that we need to let things in, where, again, in this culture that is very driven to do things, and we don't often allow ourselves to rest, you know, and just receive, you know, nourishment. So that's a very big piece of this. And that goes along with going from thinking to feeling. Again, we're not denying the left-hand side here, but incorporating. We're a very mental culture, right? Most Americans and much of the world lives in their heads. And to a large extent, feelings and the feminine associated with that has been, you know, derided and less important. Often, if you say, "Well, I just feel that way," it's not as acceptable as if you say, "Well, I know, da 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 da." You know? So, but remembering that our feelings are critically important. They have information for us. That's how our intuition speaks to us, you know, whether that's through clairvoyance, clairaudience, kinesthetic. You know, we all have intuition. We may get images, we may get voices, we may get feelings or impressions, sensations. There's different pathways for that. So to pay extra attention to our feelings and to honor the information they're offering. Essentially, if we're feeling good, keep going. If we're feeling uncomfortable, then look at what needs to change, right? I mean, that's a really obvious thing, but we often, you know, I still do. I often still override my feelings. I try not to, but really important to not discount the information that's coming in through our emotional body. Pisces is the third water sign, so it's very much about the emotional body, and the third being the transpersonal. So how not only our feelings, but empathy, compassion, as you mentioned, being able to feel what's around us and to feel our interconnectedness. So Pisces transits will sensitize us, will make us more aware of what's going on around in the world. And sometimes it can be a little overwhelming or confusing to know what's ours and what's not ours. If I suddenly start to feel kind of tired or confused or angry, if I remember, I'll ask myself, how much of this is mine? And often I'll hit, oh, but, and then I'll wait to hear what the first thing that pops into my mind is, and I'll get 5%, 10%, maybe 15%. Most of it's usually not even ours, what we're picking up. So that's a good little tool. If you start feeling overwhelmed or off in some way, ask yourself, how much of this is mine? And trust what you get in terms of percentage. And that can be really helpful. Okay, 10%, okay, I'll deal with my 10%, but I don't need it to take on the other 90%. Right. Yeah. So feelings, very important.
And I would say here, I would say, would you say that it's people who have a strong Piscean influence in their chart or Neptune placement tend to lead with that feeling? I tend, when I speak, I say, I feel this, I feel that. And it's a way to kind of know yourself and then reference the chart to see how that correspondence is. But going in, well, we're in Pisces season right now. During Pisces season, and then when Saturn goes into Pisces, do we collectively, whether or not we have a strong Piscean influence in our chart, do we tend to collectively kind of go into that?
That's a great question. Yes, thank you. We are all going to feel Saturn in Pisces, but those that have planets in Pisces, Pisces rising, a strong Neptune, and by strong I mean like conjunct your sun, like you have, square my sun, like I have. We're more attuned to that energy, so we are going to register it more strongly. So yes, those that have Piscean and Neptunian placements accented in a chart, definitely more sensitive to this energy, and will pick it up and work with it more directly. Absolutely. Yeah. But we all feel it. When an outer planet changes signs, it's a shift in collective consciousness. But some of those shifts are going to be more palpable and strong for some people than others. Absolutely. Thank you that's a very important point. Yeah. So another piece, going from our left brain to our right brain, again, not nothing wrong with the left brain. That's the part of us that can language things, categorize, logically, rationally think. We need that. But our right brain, our intuition, our capacity to see patterns, to see in a holistic way, to see connections. That's also the part of our brain that works with images, right? So very important. And that comes more forward with Piscean energy. Going along that way, along those lines, going from analysis to synthesis, right? Analysis, the left brain, synthesis is bringing things together. Judgment to the witness. This is a really crucial piece. We think of judgment, and again, there's a place for judgment, but what I mean by judgment here is labeling something good or bad, right or wrong, higher or lower, putting that in a dualistic framework. Pisces is about unity. Doesn't mean we don't make decisions or have priorities or have choices or set limits, but we're doing it again from a more unified place and a heart-centered place. So we are witnessing what is happening. That's a very tall order. And then from that place, we make choices. One of the best metaphors, I think, for the witness is the example of watching a movie. When we're in a movie, we might be very moved. We can laugh, we can cry, we can get angry, we can get scared at a movie, but some part of us knows we're watching a movie. So we have a witness while we're watching that movie. So to think of life as a movie, we're watching, we're immersed in our lives, we're immersed in the movie of life, but some part of us is aware and conscious of watching, observing. So in Pisces, we're wanting to strengthen that witness part of ourselves so we can respond rather than react, to respond consciously rather than react unconsciously. It's a big piece of that. And this is the 12th sign of the zodiac. This is the end of the road. This is what you might call enlightenment. That's a big word that can be defined in different ways, but the capacity to be present, heart-centered, and witnessing and responding to what's appropriately to what's happening, would be the spiritual goal of Pisces.
I love that. And I had a teacher who actually was a Pisces, now that I think about it, who would say to me, to that observer witness perspective, she said, sometimes when you're watching the movie, just make a big bag of popcorn and enjoy the show. Just
Great. Yes.
another layer of enjoyment, even though it's perceivably challenging to witness it in that way, that we're not so pulled in and our power taken away, but rather objectively still able to, as you say, to respond, not be pulled in by reaction. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It's a tricky one, because this is where a spiritual bypass can come in. We can use that as an excuse. So I don't need to deal with that because it's just Maya. It's just, illusion. It's just drama. It's just the movie. So that comes from this part, not from this part. Right.
That's a really good point too. But I don't think Saturn in Pisces is going to let us do spiritual bypasses. With that in my mind, with Saturn there, that's that checkpoint.
Hopefully that will be a reality check. Yes, when we're trying to escape or bypass, and when we really need to be present with something. Yeah, we know it in our body. We know it in our feelings will tell us, right? When we're bypassing, we're in our heads. We're kind of rationalizing, but when we're in our hearts, there's no mistaking that. Yeah. So we some part of us knows when we're skipping out.
Right. And it'll meet us somewhere else. You can't bypass it.
Again, we all do the best we can at the time. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly done my share of bypassing. So we've all done it. We all will do it. Exactly. So we do the best we can. Yeah. So going from certainty to fluidity, that's another level of this energy. Certainty being, we think we have it all figured out. We know, how things work. In Pisces, we're again opening to that 95% of the universe, and going, well, there's a whole lot more that I don't know. So knowing what we know is important, and knowing what we don't know is even more important. So being very open to learning, right? And that goes with knowledge and the great mystery, right? There's a beautiful quote. I wish I had, I can only paraphrase it, but something to the effect of, the greater the shores of our knowledge, the greater the shores of our not knowing, right? Yes. There's so much more than we can, again, understand with the left brain.
Yes. And I think making peace and having acceptance with the not knowing.
Yes, that it's okay to not know. And actually, from that state, then we can begin to really learn. If we have all the answers, or think we have all the answers, then we're closed off, then we can't really bring in anything else. So to be, again, receptive. This is a yin sign. All the water signs are a yin receptive sign. So learning to be open and receive, right? That's part of the process. Yeah. Okay, let's do the next one.
The last one you had, knowledge and great mystery. That is I love the great mystery. And that is where you said surrender. That's what surrender is for me, to get out of the way and be in the great mystery, to just trust that. Trust.
Yes. Beautiful. Yeah. So that's part of what we gain. Okay. So if we make these shifts from left brain to right brain and so on, we go from duality to unity, which is a very different experience of life. Right. Duality, again, is that judgment, left brain, right brain. This is good, this is bad. You can try this on in your body. I know when I judge, I can feel my body contract. I can feel my heart close down, and when I go, oh, well, maybe I don't know. Maybe this is, maybe I can be open as my body relaxes. Right. So it's a very different experience physically as well as emotionally and with our consciousness. We go from separation to connection, right? Most of our suffering comes from that sense of feeling separate from God, separate from our higher self, separate from everybody else, right? When we feel connected, then we feel very, very different, right? Again, we talked about our 5 senses and our 6th sense, going from logic to intuition. We've talked about right and wrong to wholeness, understanding to trust. Trust is a big thing for Pisces, and I think you touched on that, Victoria. Learning to trust the mystery, trust love. There's a wonderful video by Matt Kahn. He's a good teacher of self-love and unconditional love. And he has a video called Surrender to Love, which really helped me. You can Google it. He's on YouTube. He has lots of MATT Kahn, Matt Kahn.
I knew him in his early days before he started teaching. He came. I had him do a presentation in Swim years ago.
Oh my goodness! Wonderful. Now he's this big, world famous guy. Yeah,
he's a Pisces, by the way.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yes, he's a great emanation of unconditional love. Yeah, he holds that heart space, I think, really beautifully. And that video helped me realize, well, what am I surrendering to? If I'm going to give up everything, what am I going to get? Right. So trusting in the love, trusting in the heart. Right. Sacrifice to altruism. Again, what are we doing something? Why are we doing something? Is it coming from our ego, from a sense of sacrifice? Oh, I should do this. I feel obligated to do this. I can't not say no. That's the ego part of us talking, the conditioned part of us. To being called to do something, very different feeling again in our body. You can notice what happens when you feel I should do something, contraction, right? Or I feel called to do something. There's an opening, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
a really simple example, if people need an example, is, you know, you're standing on a street corner and you see an old lady struggling with her groceries crossing the street. You're there, you just go and help her because you can. You're there and you can do it. You don't think about someone's going to pat you on the back or you're going to be on the 5 o'clock news. It's like, no, you just do it, right? That's altruism. You just do it because you
Yes.
can and you're there. Right?
Yes.
Right.
You know, I always say, like, I love to watch videos of, say, rescuing animals and whatnot. But then I'm thinking, why didn't they just put the camera down and just rescue the animal? Right. It's like, I want to show you how wonderful I am by rescuing the animal.
Yeah, that's a little bit of ego there.
Right, right. But I also make a distinction with this, what you're saying, ego. I say there's a distinction between service and sacrifice. And sacrifice comes from our wounded self,
Yes.
where we're trying to overcompensate to heal ourselves by healing someone else. Service is we've done our healing and we're giving from the overflow.
Beautiful. Very important point. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't say it any better than that. Yeah. Yes. And by ego, I mean our conditioned self, the part of us that, you know, says, okay, I'm a woman, I'm an American, I'm an astrologer, whatever. We have an identity, and that's functional. But to go from identifying with that to, you know, a much larger identity. I am that, and I am more than that. Right.
Yes.
I have an essence. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love that it's functional. Wayne Dyer used to say that ego, the acronym was Earth Guide Only.
That's good.
Some navigational tool in our
Yeah.
human experience, but not letting it take over, but as full reference. Yeah.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. I like that. Okay. Go next slide here. So some places where we get stuck, or what are common responses to Piscean energy because we are not used to it or are not trained for it. So we often feel less grounded because we're feeling more expanded, right? We might be spacier, more forgetful. And I know when I've had Neptune transits, I've even become a little dyslexic. I have trouble writing down numbers, like phone numbers. I'll switch numbers around, or I'll forget how to spell words. So as we open our right brain, temporarily there's an adjustment period, and the left brain can be a little more offline until that right brain and left brain gets more in sync. So not to worry about that, but maybe to just be expecting or protecting yourself. Like I would lose my keys when I had a Neptune transit. So I had spare keys all over the place. So I would get in my car. So just know that it's nothing wrong with that. You're not getting Alzheimer's necessarily, although, you know, go get it checked out if you need to. But very common in a Pisces Neptune transit to be less grounded, spacier, right? Which can be wonderful when you're doing meditation or art, but important when you're doing something like driving or, you know, which requires focus to do what you can to stay grounded. What I found is the more that we do these energies consciously, the less they have to grab us unconsciously. So if you notice yourself being spacey, then we need more receptive time, downtime, meditative time. If you do that, then you'll be more grounded.
Wow,
So
that is really, really good, Stephanie. Can you say that one more time? That was really good.
So think of, if we feel like we're being spacier, less grounded, that's a bit of a warning sign to be in a more receptive state, to take more time for ourselves, more soul time, meditation time, nature time, and grounding time. Really important just to do what grounds us. It's different for different people. More grounding foods might work for some people. Being in nature is an instant grounding, you know, technique. Whatever tools work for you for grounding. Very important.
Really important to bring to the consciousness, the awareness of what's happening. I like to say, if you don't learn to work with the transits or your own chart, you'll be worked by it.
Perfect. Yes. We do the transits or they do us.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yes, they work us. Beautiful. Some people, when they have a major Neptune Pisces transit, feel like they're going crazy. One of my clients, long-term client, I've known her for like 30 years. She's a transpersonal psychologist, and she still felt like she was going crazy. She had a master's degree in transpersonal psychology. had a major Neptune transit, and she still thought she was going nuts. And I'm trying to remind her of this thing. So it can be pretty strong. When things start to fall away, we go into this foggy Neptunian, I don't know, place. It's hard to hang there again because we don't have training for it. We don't have support in our culture for that open space. Right. So again, if we can relax and know that this is part of a stage, a process that's happening, that can be really helpful. Just knowing that that's, part of this process makes it easier, I think, to go through it. Okay. Generally with Pisces Neptune, we need more rest. We might sleep more, dream more. I've noticed since the sun moved into Pisces just a couple of days ago that my dreams are more vivid. So rest as much as we need to. I don't think we get enough rest. Most Americans are sleep deprived, don't get enough rest. So again, if you're falling asleep during the day, your body's telling you you need more rest, right? So very common to need more during a Pisces transit. Increased sensitivity, oh my God, definitely, so less tolerance for noise, if you're a Piscean Neptunian person anyway, you are more sensitive in general and can tolerate much less than most people. You're just wired for, you have a bigger bandwidth, just more input coming in. So just to note that about yourself, and to, again, be Saturn, be responsible about managing that, doing whatever you need to do to ground yourself and protect yourself. If you live on a busy street in a busy city, and you're a Piscean, that's going to be really hard on your nervous system, and eventually can make you sick. So just honoring your body type, your consciousness, and doing what works for you with that. But definitely with Saturn Pisces, for everyone, we might become more aware of, I can't deal with this, and I shouldn't, and I don't have to. There's things we can change about that. Like turning off the Wi-Fi at night, simple things that can make a big difference.
Yes.
Often during Piscean Neptune time, we feel more detached, and we want to be more quiet, more inward, more in retreat. So you may not be as social, and that's okay. You might need, again, more inner time, or you might feel like things that you're ordinarily engaged in and interested in, like don't have the juice for that. That's okay. It'll come back, or something else will take its place. So not to worry about that. That certainly happened for me after I had a major transit. I used to be, or have been, a very active physical person, and suddenly I was like, just no juice, and felt like the plug had been pulled out of the socket, just no energy coming through my body. It will ebb and flow. Some days you might have plenty of energy. Some days you might just go, I'm a couch potato. That's okay. Do whatever you feel called to do, what your intuition guides you to. You may not have energy for, being physically active, but you might have lots of energy for doing art or meditation or something else. So trust what moves you, right?
Yes, back to your word fluidity, to let your intuition flow you towards what is most needed for you in this moment, instead of going against the flow.
Yes.
Where you're guided.
Yeah. It's become almost cliche, but to go with the flow is it's really true. Thank you. Yeah. And I've often found in my personal life and with my clients that people will become more sensitive physically as well. So you might not be able to tolerate some foods that are perfectly fine at other times for you. So just to listen to your body. When I had my Neptune opposite Neptune, for that 1 year and a year and a half, I suddenly got allergies for the first time. I had pollen allergies, and I was sniffling all the time, and certain foods were bothering me. And then as soon as the transit was finished, the allergies went away.
That's fascinating.
So again, we're being worked on all levels. So you might have physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual effects from these transits, or any transit. Yeah. Okay, so just good to know that this is normal. These are normal reactions, and and we can work with them. We don't have to suffer, right?
Yes.
So where's number 5? Oh, it's covering part of my thing. I think it's okay. Good. This one. So this is maybe a reiteration here. So again, just to emphasize the distinction, what Pisces and Neptune are offering is the capacity to perceive truth, what really is, right? Separate from what we want it to be, from our fantasies, from also our misperceptions, right? This is some of the territory that where it gets tricky, right? What is true and what's not, especially these days. And we'll talk about this more next with Pluto in Aquarius next month. There's so much misinformation in the world. One of the benefits of the internet is we have access to so much knowledge and so much input, but not all of that is true. It's everyone's particular perspective. So ultimately we have to decide, and this is very much Saturn and Pisces, what is true? What is a working truth? What is a truth that resonates in my soul and is empowering? So it's going to become increasingly important for us to, again, trust our intuition and to discern what is true or not for ourselves. Right? Acceptance versus victimization. We touched on that a little bit earlier. To know that we always have a choice, right? That acceptance is not passively, going, okay, I'll just give in here. But acceptance meaning I accept what is, I am able to deal with whatever is unfolding. I'm in that witness place and able to see what's going on. I'm not, I think Matt Kahn puts it this way, I'm not resisting reality, or I'm not arguing with reality. So not arguing with what is. This is a good definition of acceptance. Otherwise we feel powerless, victimized. Surrender and passivity, I think we've touched on that. Forgiveness and boundaries, we've touched on that. Inner peace, I think we've touched on that. Compassion and codependency, that's a tricky one too, especially for us women, who we've been trained to be caretakers, nurturers, givers. Codependency is when we sacrifice ourselves, when we say yes, when we feel we can't really say no, right? So being mindful of when we are losing ourselves, when we are doing things out of obligation rather than service or true service, right? So being able to be compassionate and, again, holding our hearts open, but not rescuing or jumping in and trying to save someone, right? That's a big one for Pisces Neptune energy, and for
and I think
both natal and transit.
What you touched on earlier about the connection. Pisces is about connection. And so for me, codependency is when we disconnect from ourselves and our own needs and connect to someone else to meet their needs with the hope that we'll get our needs met.
Yes.
And that's a real bypass of self to get others. But staying compassionate with self and giving from that place.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, that compassion extends to ourselves as well as everyone else. Yes. Good. Yeah. I think one of the hardest things I've had to do, and for many people, is to learn to love ourselves unconditionally. It doesn't mean we don't work on ourselves, that we don't, have stuff, but that we, again, accept, okay, this is where I am, and I have this goal of where I want to be. So that sense of perspective.
I hope we have time to talk about Saturn return, because I have a lot of perspective on that for those who are going to be going through their Saturn returns. Because for me, just coming out of a Saturn return, having Saturn in my first house, I was extremely noticing hard on myself, really. For that reminder to be compassionate through these transits, especially the Saturn return. Really.
Yeah. Well, we could touch on that now. Since we know that Saturn is about recognizing our limits, developing healthy boundaries, owning our authority, then the Saturn return is a very important stage around 29, 30, and again in our late 50s. And if we're lucky, we get a third one, where we are reviewing where we are, being realistic, assessing the forms and structures in our lives, and determining which ones need to be changed or eliminated and which ones we want to develop further. So it's a big check-in time, a big reality check for the Saturn return. So it's different, of course, at different stages of life. When we're in our late 20s, we're having different choices than we would in our late 50s, but they're both about examining, what am I operating on? Am I making my choices based on my inner authority or on the shoulds? What my parents taught me, what my culture dictates, what my religious upbringing, trained me to do, all the different pressures that we've gotten along the way to think and be a certain way. Saturn is about testing those structures and those choices. Are these my choices? And to know that we're in the driver's seat, that we always have choice. So very critical time. And every 7 years we get a testing time, at the Saturn return, of course, and then 7 years later, we get Saturn square Saturn, Saturn opposite Saturn, again, Saturn square Saturn, the waning square, and then Saturn conjunction. But conjunctions are the most important aspects of all the aspects because they're ending and beginning a cycle. So we're coming around and hopefully going to the next level. If we don't, then we go around again. But going, hopefully checking in and then making adjustments as necessary and then going to the next level.
Yeah. So what is that Pema Chodron quote? Nothing goes away until we've learned the lesson.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, Saturn is about learning. We think of Saturn and karma. Karma is a very loaded word. Oh, it's your karma, it's my karma. But if we define karma as simply learning,
yes,
it takes all of that stuff out of it. Just, yes, you learn it and you make a different choice next time. Yeah. So that's Saturn and Pisces too, about being gentle with ourselves. Okay, we learn actually usually more from our mistakes than from our successes. Right. Yeah. So
I love, speaking of mistake, really quick, Reverend Michael Beckwith, one of my teachers, he reframes mistake as a retake.
Good. Yes.
Opportunity to say, oh, how could I do that better? And that's what a Saturn return shows us. How are you doing what you're doing? And could you do it better to get you where you are meant to be and to fulfill the potential of your soul? I think
beautiful. Retakes. I like that. Thank you. Very good way to frame that. Yeah. Okay, some ways to work with Neptune Pisces, with Saturn and Pisces, and then anytime you're having an important Neptune Pisces transit, be very discerning about where you put your time and energy. Okay, I would highly recommend limiting media exposure. We're being bombarded by a lot of negativity. Most mass media, what's in the daily news and on TV and so on, it's designed to put us in fear, because that fear self, there's that phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. And there's been studies showing that people tend to buy more newspapers and do more clicks when there's a negative news. We're hardwired, our limbic system, our reptilian brain, our nervous system is designed to pay attention to danger, right? So if something in the news is fear producing, we're on it. We're automatically wired to pay attention to that.
Yes, negativity bias, right? Is that?
Yes. And so then that affects our, our cortisol levels, our stress levels, and it also narrows our focus. We literally go out of our mind, out of our frontal cortex, down into our lower brain, our reptilian brain, which is our fight and flight response. So we're literally dumber when we're in fear. We really can't think straight when we're in fear. So really important to know that about the media. Unfortunately, much of it, is, I no longer even listen to the radio or watch TV. I used to be an avid NPR. I would have that on all the time. I don't even listen to NPR anymore myself because there's so much fear porn, even on NPR. So I read my news instead. And I'm happy to share my sources if anyone's interested. Just email me. But there are a number of sources where you can just kind of keep your finger on what's going on, what's the latest propaganda, what's the latest crisis happening, but then also get some other sources that are good news, that are, what the media, the mass media is sharing is about, less than 1% of what's really happening in the world. Right? We call it the news, but it's really the olds. It's about the wars, it's about the tragedies, and I'm not saying ignore that. I want to know when there's an earthquake in Turkey so I can pray for those people, so that I can send support if I'm able to do that. When we hear about tragic things, we could do something about it, and that's a really good way to respond, rather than go into fear and contraction and go, oh my God, feel helpless. So either do something about it, and we can always pray, we can always send blessings, or take your attention elsewhere. Yes. Very important, because we're more sensitive now with this transit. Second one, really important, have some kind of spiritual practice every day, whatever that is for you. Quiet time, gardening, the meditation sounds, can be intimidating for some people. There's many ways to meditate. You can chant, you can do visualizations, you can listen to music, you can do a simple breath technique. There's a gazillion ways to meditate, but something where you go from that doing to being, where you go from being on to receptive, quiet, internally focused. It does amazing things for your physiology. It reduces your stress levels. It boosts your immune system. It calms your nervous system down, and it connects you with your higher self. There's a gazillion things it does, but it will help you stay sane in these pretty crazy times on planet Earth. So really commit, and that's Saturn, commitment. Create a structure. Do it first thing in the morning if you can. Last thing at night is also a good time. Anytime during the day that you feel ungrounded. I set my clock, an alarm for noon. There's something called the Noon Club. People around the world send their prayers out to the world at noon local time, wherever you are. You can join that and use that as a reminder to just kind of take a deep breath, ground, and send out your prayers. Mm-hmm. So whatever works for you, but something daily, minimum 20 minutes, I think is I find that takes at least that long often to calm down and really get the benefit of quiet time. There's a beautiful quote from Gandhi. Someone once asked him, what do you do when you're too busy to meditate? And he said, I meditate twice as much.
Yes, beautiful.
It's also a Zen saying with a similar intention, meaning the busier we are, the more crucial our decisions, right? Like when you're driving a car at a high speed, a little bit of off and you're way off the road, right? So the faster we go, the more important it is to be conscious and centered so we don't make big mistakes. Right? So it'll end up paying off tremendously in more clarity, fewer mistakes, more focus. Yeah. So being in nature is immediate meditation. So whatever we can do, your local park, or if you're lucky to be by water of any kind of nature, even just with your plants, you can talk to your plants. They will talk back to you if you're receptive. Animals, immediate connection to Pisces energy. Noticing synchronicities, the word is very interesting, synchronicity, sin to be with, and chronos, time, to be in sync with a different kind of time, with more universal sacred time. Synchronicities are markers that you're on the right track. When you hear a book 2 or 3 times, or when, something kind of clicks or happens without a lot of effort, generally that's an indication you're on the right track. So really notice and honor those synchronicities. And again, pay attention to however your intuition comes to you, whether that's through a voice in your head or an image or a sensation in your body, a feeling. Dreams often, can be indicators of intuition as well. Mm-hmm. This can be a really creative time. We are all artists. There's many ways to be creative. We don't necessarily have to be a painter or a writer, or what we consider to be a conventional way of being an artist. But, being a good teacher is an art. Being a good mother is an art. Being a good friend is how we live our lives, how we create our personal space is an art, right? So to allow ourselves to receive and to notice what in our environment supports us and what drains us or distracts us. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dream work is a wonderful Pisces Neptune thing to do. That can be very helpful for processing things. You could get healing in your dreams if you set that intention before you go to sleep at night. You could pray to be shown an insight or to have some healing happen, and then notice what you remember when you wake up. Mm-hmm. If you've never taken an intuition development class, that can be really helpful to help you trust your intuition. I did that many years ago, and it really, really helped me. We all have intuition, but we don't always pay attention to it. We don't always value it. It's always coming in, but if we're really busy and a lot of stimulation, we're not going to hear it. It's a much quieter voice than our ego voices. So again, that quiet time will help us be receptive to that, and it will save a lot of time and energy going down the wrong track. Right. If you want to explore past lives, if you're drawn to that, that can be very helpful to bring forth the strengths of those past lives and to also heal issues that often span lifetimes. Contact Victoria for that kind of work. Divinations tools like astrology, tarot, the I Ching, numerology. There's many, many divination tools. Whatever ones work for you can provide insight and connect you with your intuition. Those are great tools. Mm-hmm. And channeling, we all channel to some degree. When something comes through, when something pops into your head, that's channeling, right? So, again, to pay attention and trust that. And a little caveat on that, a wise friend of mine who was very intuitive and a great channeler reminded me, just because they're dead doesn't mean they're wise, meaning be mindful of what you're channeling. They're just like on the earth plane, in the spirit world, there are many ranges of development. Just because someone's in the spiritual world they don't have body, but they may or may not be very evolved. So you want to only work with the spirits or ancestors or channels that are for the light, for your higher good, for the good of all concerned. So be again discerning as to how you play in these more etheric realms. Okay, we need discernment there as we do on Earth. Okay. And then if you have the energy to volunteer, and again, not out of a sense of obligation, but if you feel called to, like, I used to volunteer at an animal shelter. I love animals, and I would just go and clean the cat boxes and play with the animals, So things like that, or if you want to work in a soup kitchen or for anything. Again, you don't have to. If you have the energy, if you have that overflow, to do that. That's Pisces, Neptune stuff. That's a great way to be giving. Again, from a place of overflow. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think one last slide here. And so this slide was developed for the presentation, which was the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction at Pisces last year. In April of 2022, we had a once in 166 year conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune in Pisces. They conjunct every 13 years, but only once every 166 years in Pisces. So last spring, we had a super duper Neptune wave. The sun, we have Mars and Venus and Mercury in Pisces, and then Jupiter, Neptune. So there's a huge wave of Pisces energy in the spring of 2022. But these keywords also apply for Saturn going through the houses. So we're all going to be experiencing Saturn in Pisces, depending on our rising sign, the time of our birth, and the date and place of our birth. What house it's located in will be the focus of the Saturn and Pisces transit for us. For some people, it's going to be in the first house, some in the second, and so on. So this gives you some keywords to work with. So, for example, if you have the transit, if Saturn is transiting your first house in Pisces, then this is about developing more faith in ourselves. The first house is very similar to the first sign of Aries. So if you know a little bit about the signs, you can extrapolate a lot of that to the houses. They're not the same in how they function. Think of it like a noun and a verb. They function differently in a sentence, but they can have the same cognate, the same origin. So the first house is very similar to Aries, the first sign of Aries, and to Mars to some degree, that's ruling planet. So how we assert ourselves, how we put ourselves out into the world, how we initiate things. All right. So initiating ourselves more on faith, leading with our faith, right, would be Saturn in Pisces, transiting that first house, trusting our intuition, moving forward on that. Right. If Saturn is transiting our second house, the focus is on our resources. And to a large degree, underneath that is our sense of self-worth. Right. Most money issues and prosperity issues trace back to self-esteem issues. We either don't feel we deserve it, or we have a lack of self-worth, so we sabotage that or unconsciously deflect it. So learning to love ourselves unconditionally is especially important with the second house, right? Developing a healthy sense of self-esteem and unconditional love. Third, if Saturn's transiting your third house, then this is the house of communication, right? So really listening to intuition, letting that come through. And also that's how we communicate, right? Nonviolent communication is a wonderful tool for many, many things, but it's a great spiritual practice. It helps us understand what is a feeling and what is a thought. We often confuse feelings and thoughts. And it reminds us that the real intention of communication is connection. And I'm not trying to convince someone or pressure someone, but I want to connect and understand and share my feelings and perspectives, and then hear that person's feelings and perspective. From that place, we can find the win-win. So it's a wonderful process. And with Saturn trending the third, we remember that life is our meditation cushion. The third house is our everyday activities, what's around us in our immediate environment, how we're interacting every day. And so really holding that as a practice of every moment is I have a chance to practice and to wake up.
I love that. Life is our meditation cushion. I'm going to quote you.
Yeah, thank you. I got that in a meditation session. If Saturn's transiting our fourth house, and the focus goes to our family and our roots, right? So maybe redefining our relationship to our past. right? To our ancestry, to the earth itself, to what we're born into, right? Developing and strengthening our connection to where we live and to our generational inheritance. The fifth house, creativity, right? It's giving form, Saturn, to our creative expressions. And again, letting that be guided and flowing through us, right? Let it be inspired. Right? Saturn going to our sixth house, we want to get serious about our health, and maybe using more, what's the word, energy medicines, perhaps vibrational medicines, flower essences, acupuncture. There's many ways that we can heal ourselves besides Western medicines. It has its place. Thank God for Western medicine. But we also have a large body of metaphysical medicine. So Saturn Pisces reminds us there are other ways we can heal ourselves. Right? And looking at what is service for ourselves. Saturn going into the seventh house, looking at the balance in our relationships. Where are we giving more than we're receiving? Right? Where can we become more compassionate in how we are with other people and see everyone as a teacher for ourselves? Saturn in the eighth house takes us into shadow material, right? And so with Pisces looking at our fears, but also, transcending that, working with that. The more that we're connected with our higher self, the less we'll go into fear, right? So really connecting that and using the tools that work with that, shamanism, tantra, and so on. Saturn transiting our eighth house, looking at our belief system and redefining what is true for us.
You mean the ninth house?
I'm sorry, ninth house. Thank you. Yes. Right. So, looking at doing things like maybe doing a vision quest or pilgrimage, but looking at what has shaped our worldview, our belief system, and are those things still true? And weeding out the things that no longer apply, that may not never have been true in the first place. Saturn going to the 10th almost always corresponds with some choice points around career. If we have prepared and are on the right track, then Saturn will bring the rewards of our efforts. Then we get promotions or recognition, or we go to the next level in our work. If we have run the course of that career, we're like, I'm done with that, well, then we often make a shift, a professional change in that. But testing also our relationship to authority and responsibility. Saturn is the planet that goes with Capricorn, the 10th sign. And so the 10th house has a similar terrain of learning about responsibility and authority. And again, making sure that we're running on our own inner authority rather than the shoulds. Saturn going through the 11th house. And this applies for the last couple of years when Saturn was going through the 11th sign of Aquarius, kind of testing our relationship with community, with technology, being realistic and responsible, and looking at redefining, well, who's part of our tribe? Who do I really resonate with? Who can I collaborate with? What things do I want to change in terms of social and political reforms? So one way to do Saturn in Pisces is sacred activism, where we, there are many ways to be an activist. God bless the people that are on the, out there with pickets and doing things on the physical level. We can also do a lot of things on the metaphysical level through prayer, group meditations are very powerful. Other forms of sacred activism. Yeah. And then Saturn in Pisces in the 12th house is kind of a double dose. Again, calling our attention deeply inward, focusing on, letting go of our attachments, dissolving our identity that has been anchored outside of ourselves and having that become anchored internally, right? So often feeling deeply called inward, maybe wanting to do some kind of retreat, either informally or formally, and diving deep into our spiritual studies. Okay. Yeah. Okay, you can do much more, but there's two more images that I'd like to share. So one image that I was trying to think of for Saturn, think of Saturn as being, climbing the mountain, wanting to get somewhere to the top. Sometimes the road is quite rocky and sometimes it's clear and sometimes it's a little misty. And with Saturn and Pisces, it's more like this, where we're not always sure where the path is going to take us, but we're trusting that there is a path. And if we just take the next step with Saturn and Pisces, especially, and Pisces in general, we can't always see down the road. We may not know why we feel like we feel called to take this class or, read this book or do something like that. But if we just take that step, from that step, we see the next step. And from that step, we see the next step. So it's on an as need to know basis sometimes. If we were to see the end result, it might be too scary. Like if you had told me decades ago that I would be an astrologer and then I would be speaking at conferences and being on YouTube and doing all this, I would say, no fucking way. No way. But, I just kept going. I couldn't,
Yes.
at a certain point, I just could not do it. I kept
Um,
feeling called to do it. And here I am. So to trust, to take what feels like the next step. And from there, you see another step. And from there, another step. If you can't see the end of the road, that's okay. And there's maybe a good reason for that. So just keep trusting your calling, your intuition, those inklings, those little nudges that you get.
Wow, I think you're speaking directly to me, but I'm sure you're speaking to a lot of people as well.
Yeah,
So good.
yeah. So this image, I've often sat on this bench. This is in Port Townsend in North Beach, this bench that overlooks the Sano Island. Just an example of letting ourselves to rest and be in places where we can safely expand and again receive from nature, from our higher self. This is the gift of Pisces, and it's can be an incredibly rich time where we feel more whole, more centered, as well as more grounded and connected with all there is. So I hope this has been helpful and that this helps people to navigate these currents with more skill and ease.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie.
Oh, you're
This
very
was
welcome.
so incredibly generous. I thought,
Mhm.
you were just going to talk top of the trees, but you took us so deep into the feeling, the possibilities of Saturn and Pisces. So thank you so much. I'm going to go back to our shared view. And if you want to stop your,
Sure.
um,
Mhm.
whoops, that was truly so lush. And there's more because you have a 2.5 hour, is it 2 hour
2
presentation?
hours. Yeah.
And I listened to that like 2-3 times. It's so rich. So again, go to Stephanie's website, ecoastrology.com. And you could also find out more about Stephanie's work there. She's going to be back with us next month on March to talk about, we decided before this one, we need to talk about Pluto moving into Aquarius, another big shift. So if you have any questions about Stephanie's presentation, please comment. Also, just comment with your takeaways or where you're viewing. We want to know, that someone's receiving this out there. And if you feel called, subscribe. And thank you again for being with us today. I am so grateful for you stopping by. And I'm so grateful to you, Stephanie, for sharing your wisdom. And so grateful you'll be back with me next month. So thank you again, and take good care of yourself and nurture that beautiful soul potential.
Yes.
It's needed.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.